On this episode of the Agronomy Answers podcast, we're going to talk about when not to use PGRs or plant growth regulators. So I brought Matt, our Hefty Naturals brand manager, to talk about some of these opportunities where we shouldn't use these products. Thanks for joining me, Matt.
Thanks, Zach.
So what is PGRs or plant growth regulators, just to start it off?
Yeah, so plant growth regulators, another term is going to be plant growth hormones. So just like us as humans, how energy is dictated in the body and where a plant is going to spend that energy to grow is based on the level of hormonal levels in the plant. So we think about things like auxins, we think about things like gibberellic acids, we think about things like cytokinins. All of those are going to be a specific dictation to that plant as to where they're going to spend energy.
So that's kind of what they are. Now, if you haven't heard this topic before or have used one of these products, how many are out there? There's a lot out there, right?
More than we can count. Yeah, and unfortunately, there's products that are being promoted at the wrong time. And I will tell growers that the one category in the biological space that will take yield backwards is if you use the wrong product at the wrong timing. You will absolutely confuse a plant, and you will take yield negative. And the risk there is tremendous. So that's why I think we got to have that conversation about when not to use some of these products, because an auxin is a wildly different product than a cytokinin. And if you use those products at the wrong time, they will be negative to yield.
And those are all PGR or plant growth hormone type products.
That's right.
So where would you start off with? What would be one specific timing to start of when not to use these type of products?
Sure. So we'll start with gibberellic acid. Okay. So gibberellic acid is a signal in the plant that tells a plant to stretch its plant cells, don't split. So there are some products in the marketplace that are dominant in gib, and gibberellic acid is ultimately going to be a product that we would recommend to growers that are trying to raise more silage. So if you're a dairy operation or a cattle operation and you're going to produce corn silage and you want more tonnage, you can make an application early in the season with a gibberellic acid product, and it will trigger that plant to make more leaf mass. It's not going to necessarily affect the plant from a yield perspective, but you're getting more tonnage because you're creating more leaf mass. Gib, again, is that signal that tells the plant to stretch. So a plant has a hard time making gibberellic acid when the temperatures outside are below around 70 degrees. So we really like to make a gibberellic acid application in silage acres when corn is about V2 and the temperatures are below 70 degrees. Now, I'm not saying that if the temperature is 80 degrees that day, if you make an application of a gib product, it's not going to work. I'm just saying more consistency shows up when we're 50, 60, and 70-ish degrees when we make that application. So we think about V2, V3. Okay, many growers want to simplify applications on the farm, and they say, oh, we're going to mix this with a herbicide. This becomes an issue. So we've learned, and companies have said this many times, that if you have a gibberellic acid product and you mix it with an HPPD product, or you mix it with a plant growth regulator like dicamba, you can affect that plant from a negative response. So that's number one. If you're going to run a gib product, it really needs to be on its own individual pass. We really don't want to mix that one with a herbicide, because you're sending confusing signals to the plant of where that plant should be spending energy.
So on gib, you want to make sure that it's early in the season when it's cooler.
Yep.
And it needs to be by itself, or don't use it.
Yeah, so gib especially, if growers wait until V5 or V6, that plant is making and processing its own gib. Making that application is not, you're better off spending those dollars in other places. And again, we've talked about this in the past, we'll say it today. All of these are tools. And the tool with gibberellic acid is early season. Optimal timing would be V2, below 70 degrees on its own. Yeah, you can put a micronutrient with it, but ultimately you're trying to send a signal to the plant that you want more leaf tissue early in the season.
Just on grass crops.
Just on grass crops. Yep.
Okay, so we talked about gib. What would be another PGR, plant growth hormone, and what would you not use it on?
Yeah, so auxins would be the next one. So a plant in early vegetative stages is in what we call auxin dominance. And auxin is the signal to the plant that tells the plant to grow more roots, more importantly, more fine root hair. The plant early season is going to be auxin dominant because it's ultimately trying to create a bigger root factory to feed that plant later season. The last thing we want to do with an auxin is spraying auxin when we're in reproductive timings. And the reason why is when we move a plant into reproduction, the plant converts into what we call cytokinin or kinetin dominance. It's very easy in corn. When you see a tassel emerging, that plant's moving into reproduction. We really don't want to spray an auxin because you're sending a signal to the plant that the plant's trying to move its energy in for reproduction. You spray an auxin, now you tell that plant, oh, no, we need more root growth. It's against what that plant fundamentally is trying to do. So auxins can be very dangerous if we make that wrong timing application. We like auxins earlier in the season. We don't like auxins late in the season. So if we're in reproductive timing, especially in corn at VT and beyond, we don't want to make that application. In soybeans, it becomes a little bit of a gray area. We think about a soybean plant beginning reproduction at R1. R1 happens at summer solstice, which is around the 22nd of June. Many growers are still making a herbicide application at that time. So if we're going to spray herbicide in soybeans at reproductive timing, we want to make sure an auxin is in the tank because the auxin is going to help the plant process and metabolize that herbicide to get it to move quicker back to kinetin dominance or cytokinin dominance in the plant. So auxins in soybeans are a little bit different. We don't want to spray an auxin with a fungicide. We don't want to spray an auxin with a micronutrient pass. If we're in that reproductive timing, we only want to use it with that herbicide pass.
Okay, so auxins stay in the vegetative
Yep.
when that's growing earlier in the season, basically.
Yep.
Now, what plant growth hormone is on the reproductive side that you wouldn't want to flip-flop those?
Yeah, great. So that kind of moves us into the next. So cytokinins or kinetins trigger the plant into reproduction. And there's a lot of cytokinins in the market. That's probably one of the fastest growing categories in the plant growth hormone space, and it's for good reason. I mean, if you can move a plant quicker into reproduction, for the folks that aren't familiar, kinetin or cytokinin, if we can spray that on a corn plant 2 to 3 leaves before tassel, naturally when we increase the level of cytokinins in the plant, we are affecting things like pollen viability or affecting things like silk viability. So when a plant begins to pollinate, you're making more viable pollen to land on the silks, and you're making the silk tube stronger so that we're getting the potential of fertilizing the embryo or the egg. And what happens here is we'll see sometimes when a plant will move into reproductive timing, we'll get to brown silk, and we had the potential where we could have pollinated, but we didn't. Well, was it because of a lack of pollination or was it a lack because of silk viability? And if a plant is under stress, it could be both. So we can absolutely trigger a plant to move into reproduction quicker if we're getting closer to that window. And the same thing holds true to soybeans. Once we get to R1 in soybeans and we're trying to push for early season flower, maybe we have a good window of sunlight, maybe we have adequate moisture, we're trying to get flowers on soybeans. Making a kinetin application will send that signal to the plant that your kinetin levels are up. You have the opportunity to put more flowers on that plant. So with any plant growth hormones, what you're ultimately trying to do is you're trying to force an imbalance in the plant that the plant naturally is trying to recover from. So in the case of spraying an auxin during auxin dominance, you overload the plant with an auxin. The plant makes gibberellic acid. It makes cytokinin. It's making the other hormones that plant will need to rebalance its ratios. And when it does that, that's when we're getting the energy efficiency of processing and metabolizing a herbicide, or in the case of cytokinins in reproduction, making more efficiencies when it comes to reproduction. So spraying a cytokinin during reproduction or just prior to reproduction can be a great tool. When not to spray one, do not spray a cytokinin product and auxin dominance, because you force that plant to move into kinetin dominance away from being auxin dominant. You just burned a ton of energy in the plant that the plant didn't have. You will take a plant negative. So we've seen some companies make recommendations where you can apply a cytokinin product with a herbicide in early vegetative stages. I do not make that recommendation.
So when you talk about the vegetative versus the reproductive timing, both either auxin or cytokinin, they're causing a little bit of an imbalance in the plant that the plant helps grow a little bit better after that.
Right.
And if you flip them, it's causing the imbalance, but then it's causing it to think to do something
confusing signal.
Wrong, like basically doing the wrong thing at the wrong time.
It's a confusing signal to the plant. Exactly. So auxins, we want to spray during vegetative growth. Cytokinins, we want to spray as close to reproduction as possible. We want to be very specific when we make those conversations.
Okay, so we talked about 3 different PGRs. Is there another PGR that you would talk about when not to use it?
Not necessarily PGR. How about the category in general, right? So the other thing that we will tell growers, and I think this gets people in trouble more so than not, herbicide applications. So you want to spray a herbicide on an actively growing weed, okay? But many times during the summer, we get into windows of weather where it's not the best. And the one area I can think of the most is high temperatures. So if we get above 90 degrees, a plant is naturally going to be able to begin to close its leaf stomata. It's going to begin to shut down because of those high temperatures. We probably shouldn't be spraying a herbicide to begin with. Now, some cases, things like Liberty or PPOs, we want that heat to get that burner type effect. But in the case of auxins, if you are over 90 degrees on a plant, I don't care if it's a jib, I don't care if it's a cytokinin, if it's an auxin, I would say plant growth hormones in general. If a plant is under tremendous heat stress or drought stress, do not spray a plant growth hormone. And the reason why is the plant's in natural survival mode. And if you spray one of those products that forces an imbalance, that plant is using energy that it does not have to recover. And we've seen more times than not, especially with auxins and high heat, if you get above 90 degrees during the day and you make that application in the heat of the day, you can see a negative yield response.
So it seems like with all of these different products, if you're going to be getting a PGR, plant growth hormone type product, you need to ask, what is it specifically? Because every single one has different timings and different things to follow. Obviously, when it's really hot, all of them you just kind of want to get out. But all of them have their own specific timings that if you mess up, it could take things backwards.
Yep. Yeah, and that's just plant growth hormones in general. So, like I said, if I were to rank the 1 through 3 of where I would tell a grower to watch out, is understand what product you're buying. Is it an auxin dominant or a cytokinin dominant product? And the reason why I say it that way is there's products like Mega Grow in the market that do have cytokinins in it, but it's at a very small trace. So it's an auxin dominant product. If you're going to spray an auxin dominant product, make sure you're spraying it either with a herbicide or during vegetative stages. If you're bringing a kinetin or cytokinin product into the market, if it's kinetin dominant, you want to spray that as close to reproduction as possible because you're sending a signal to the plant. I think plant growth hormones are one of the most consistent tools in the marketplace from a biological standpoint if used correctly. And I think, if you were to look at the overall market of how many millions of acres of plant growth hormone is put on, it is by far in the largest category. But growers tend to just throw things out there, and if you see success, put more on. This is one where you got to make sure the rate is correct. You got to make sure the timing is correct. And if the weather is stressed to that plant, do not make these applications.
Awesome. Well, so these are some of the tips on when not to use PGRs or plant growth hormones. So thanks so much for all these different lessons.
You bet.
And thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Agronomy Answers podcast. Be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.